everyone. Welcome to the Uphill Athlete Podcast. And I'm going to say the Uphill Athlete Podcast times the Your Diet Sucks podcast today, because I am joined by two amazing athletes, businesswomen, just all around incredible people who started a podcast called Your Diet Sucks. And they were kind enough to come on the Uphill Athlete podcast today to speak with us. So, Kylee and Zoe, happy to have you on.
Pumped to be here, Alyssa.
Yeah, excited. Thanks for having us.
Of course. So, I'd love to hear just a little bit about both of you, and also just a bit about why you started the podcast and what it's about. Zoe, if you want to take it away first.
Sure. So, Kylee and I have been best friends for like going on 5 years now. I actually met her while she was crewing her husband at a world record attempt a few years ago. And I was like, this is the smartest person I have ever met. We need to be best friends. And we started doing a lot of runs together. And since she was a registered dietitian nutritionist, I was getting a lot of free nutrition coaching and advice, which was very helpful for me. But as, both a journalist and an athlete in eating disorder recovery, my friendship with Kylee sort of revealed how many things I had wrong about nutrition, how many mistakes I was making, or how many misconceptions or misperceptions I had. And for me, like, my curiosity is always piqued when I find out all the ways in which I am incorrect about things, because being wrong is the most exciting jumping off point to find a more interesting story and to figure out how to be right. And so, a lot of the subject matter of this podcast, if it's like weird, fad diets or emerging science or cultural narratives, are the kind of like juicy topics that Kylee and I like to talk about when we're on our runs, or when we're, bonding over a glass of rosé. And I just thought, like, wow, like, we both have this amazing professional experience. We should combine it in a format for more people, because she has this amazing, like, the nutritional background, and I, as a journalist, am essentially a professional question asker. And I thought that would give us a pretty unique perspective to storytell from.
I love that. I will just quickly add that I have not heard many people say that being wrong is the jumping off point of asking more questions and learning more. And I just want to highlight that, because that is incredible. I wish a lot more people had that perspective. So that's amazing.
Thinking you're right is the worst thing
Kylee,
you can be for a journalist, especially.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that was one thing too, that like every episode that we have, we always want to examine the topic from both sides to see, what research exists on both ends of the spectrum and in between as well, and then help people navigate that information. And we might end up at the end of the episode saying, like, well, here's the nuance, but you kind of still, this is up to you to make that decision. But we're trying to present it in a way that's going to allow people to make their own decision in an informed way, versus like a something that's biased and they're just getting on socials or something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've listened to some of the episodes, and I do really enjoy coming to the end and not feeling like I necessarily and being like corralled one way or other. It's just like, I know more. Awesome. Like, I can make a more informed decision. So yeah, definitely doing your job there. So today I've asked the two of you to dive into the topic of fad diets. I think we see them very commonly in running. I think also uphill kind of comes from the perspective of, we'll say, like, general mountain athletes. Incredibly common. The whole fasted training and low carb diet, all of that. So we kind of want to focus on fad diets today, and I'll start off with, why do you see endurance athletes as being the most susceptible, or very susceptible, to fad diets?
I'll have Kylee speak to the more like scientific perspective, but from like the cultural and like narrative side of things, we're an extreme bunch of people. We spend a lot of our time in extreme environments around other extreme people. And I think that that sort of like, that proclivity for extremity makes us additionally susceptible to being like, well, I already recreationally run 100 miles and climb mountains for fun. Like, why would that extremity not also extend to my diet? Like, we're doing a lot of like pretty intense training. And I think a lot of times, endurance sports and mountain sports particularly attract a certain type of pretty type A person, someone who's incredibly driven. And that drive can be a double-edged sword because it on one hand is the thing that, propels us to, long distance finishes. It propels us off mountains. But sometimes if we don't harness it in quite the right way, that proclivity for like obsession that's not properly channeled can sometimes catapult us into less productive ways of expressing that desire to push the envelope, less productive ways of trying to be excellent. And I think it's just like that, where we're a self-select group of people who already do extraordinary things and are extraordinarily disciplined. And I think sort of like the shadow side of that can be like, well, why would that can also extend to sometimes restrictive diets, or the fact that like a lot of times mountain sports like become pretty insular communities when someone who like you've been tied into like the person that you trust who belays you does something and they say it works for them, they have a sample size of one and they say, well, keto worked for me. That can make you additionally susceptible to that. And it doesn't mean that their N of one experience is wrong, but you might be over indexing on how important that very small sample size is.
Yeah, and then from the I feel like my perspective from the performance side, like when I'm working with people, they think that like in order to gain that extra small percentage, like the fad diet or the extreme thing is the way to go. And so they don't want to just be like, well, you said balanced nutrition. Like that's not like a good enough answer for me. So they latch on to like wanting to feel like they belong to some certain like community of like diet extreme, and then b I see it a lot for like trying to gain a performance advantage or like that extra percent, when in reality like the thinking there might be a bit backwards.
From a coaching perspective, I could not agree more. It's like I always liken it as a lot of times people are looking at step 59 and we're still not doing 1, 2, and 3 that well. So, yeah, it's could not agree more. So, what are and we've thrown out a couple, but what are some of these fad diets that we commonly see for athletes?
I would say, I mean, well, we see the low carb, high fat a lot. I think particularly in mountain endurance sports. We see when we're also talking about things like paleo or carnivore or those types of diets that are pretty extreme would be, I
I
would say,
always
fads.
I always caution people against investing in a diet that has good branding and name recognition, because
Oh,
oftentimes the diets that work, like balanced agnostic diets, like the Mediterranean diet, like they don't have a cute little logo and a website where they can take your money. And I think that that is pretty revelatory about what the be all end all goal of a lot of these diets is.
Like the primal blueprint or something by like Mark Sisson, like, those kinds of things that you see by doctors that are like, they're just trying to make like a little bit of extra money. Like those are the fad diets that are just like red flag right there.
I would even say that a hyperfixation on or an overemphasis on weight as being determinative for performance success is a fad. It's not validated in the research, and it sort of comes and goes depending on like where our cultural sort of like pulse check is around what bodies we currently find acceptable, desirable, and like worthy of value in our culture. Like the sort of bodies that we lift up as being athletes now are different than those we were lifting up 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think that people treating their bodies, the very stuff of their existence, as a passing fad is really, really detrimental, not just to performance, but to your overall well-being as well. And so I think that just like the focus on weight, it's a fad with staying power, but it is a fad.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think a really a good marketing strategy for your podcast could be just like good healthy diet
Yeah.
sticker. Like, I don't know if it would sell that well, but like everything is like, oh, vegan, paleo, whatever. Like, they're literally the things on the package that will say that. Like, you just say part of a well balanced, great, staying healthy diet.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
no one's going to buy that is the thing.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, and I think, but also like I tried to, on that note, like I just finished my endurance fueling book, Practical Fueling for Endurance Athletes, and
Awesome.
I made the, yeah, like the conscious decision to not focus on weight and body composition in the book, and really wanted to provide a resource for people that was science backed but also like easy to implement. And I think sometimes people get so overwhelmed with information out there, like even like one-on-one clients that I'm working with, they're just so overwhelmed that they like latch on to this set of rules in this diet because it's like, oh, this is the way that I need to do things. And with a more, maybe what they think is nebulous, like a more balanced approach, they don't really understand exactly how to implement that in the right way. And so providing them with steps, action steps, or things that they can focus on, like adding in or getting more of in, etc. And here's how you break this down and approach it. I think that helps people. They would just want something to be able to like kind of easily put into place in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's as you were saying that, it makes me think so much of how we progress in training people. Like a lot of times I actually see heart rate training as almost like the bumpers or the training wheels to help you to understand this more in many ways
Mm.
like fluctuating and nebulous range of RPE, which is where I tend to like to lead people because I always people who listen to the podcast know me to say that I always joke if you're on a mountain and Sasquatch runs up and grabs your watch and throws it off the cliff, like, what are you going to do? Are you just going to sit down and be like, I don't know my heart rate. What am I going to do? I can't like climb this mountain anymore. And I feel like that's probably very similar to how athletes feel of like, hey, I feel really drowned in having all this rage because I haven't been taught how to just listen to my body. So I guess how do you help athletes to kind of let go of that rigidity of those rules, kind of like working more towards that from a strict diet to like, hey, we can undo this. I know that's a huge question, so take it kind of as you will.
I mean, I think here's the thing is like there are certain things that we know are going to help endurance athletes perform nutrition wise. So I think chatting with athletes about their certain things in particular, I'm thinking about carbohydrates, and like I like to teach my athletes, like for a lot of my athletes, if they've just been told to eat enough, that like doesn't help them. So they want more specifics on like, okay, what does that look like? Like, what does this amount of carb look like for different days of training? And so I teach them how to kind of get themselves to a minimum. And then we focus on hunger and fullness because here's the thing is like, there are flaws with even just focusing on hunger and fullness, especially when you're training a lot. So, your leptin and ghrelin levels can be altered, which can make it difficult to discern, like, should I be eating? Should I not be eating? So, teaching people how to recognize, like, what does that hunger and fullness look like in the context of having some specificity, I think can actually be really empowering. And, like, once you get a sense of, like, oh, okay, this is about how much carb I need on a heavier day of training, and you kind of get yourself close there and know how to listen to the body if you need more, then that's kind of where, I'm trying to help people understand that concept, I guess.
And I would also say that, for folks like me who are maybe on that journey of getting to listen to, like, learning how to listen better to their bodies, like, it is really normal that it is hard. Like, we live in a culture that, like, a lot of the messaging, particularly in the world of athletics and fitness, is trying to teach us to be skeptical of our bodies, is trying to sell us something so that we don't listen to our bodies and we listen to a device, or we listen to a diet, or we listen to an influencer, or we listen to a guru, or we listen to a training plan, as opposed to learning how to preference our own existence and our own experience. And I think that, like, it makes a lot of sense that sometimes people struggle with it. And I just wanted to validate that. But there are a lot of people who are benefiting from that struggle. And I think always being skeptical of, like, why am I being told to not trust my hunger? Or, like, not in the case of like the leptin and ghrelin things, like there are, like, yes, training does modify your hunger, but I'm speaking more in the terms of like when athletes are told to, like, oh, drink water to suppress your appetite, have caffeine to suppress your appetite, or like, you know, don't eat this or eat this only at certain times of days because like it'll, change your metabolism in this way. And a lot of that messaging can just really get our wires crossed. And that, yeah, I would just always urge people to come back to working with an expert like Kylee, and also believing their own experience.
Yeah, Kylie, I have sent your Instagram. I loved when you were doing like the plates and
Hmm.
that kind of like very visual representation. I have sent that to clients before and been like, "Hey, take a look at this," like just to give some kind of a basis. But I think one of the pieces, and I think this ties into Zoe, what you touched on about personality traits, is that so like what we do is hard. It is very challenging. You have to dig quite deeply at the end of a 100 miler or a 50K, climbing Everest. And so I think oftentimes we really associate that having to be tough and hard, I think also with our diets as well. And so I'm curious how you kind of like nudge athletes towards your diet doesn't have to suck. Quite literally, like to prove that you're tough enough to go do the hard thing.
I would say is I don't think toughness is always inherently valuable, right? Like I could
I agree.
ram my head against a wall for 10 hours, which would be a very tough thing to do, but the outcome of that is totally decoupled from any of my actual values. And I think that our culture sort of, again, gets its signals crossed, and we forget how to celebrate the outcome, or we forget how to celebrate perseverance in the process. And instead we just celebrate inherently like the thing that we think is easy to see, which is the toughness. So, you don't, like, not everything needs to be banging your head against a wall for 10 hours, and just because it's harder doesn't mean it's better. And I think that a lot of times, again, endurance sports, we do kind of like to do things the hard way. Not sure what that says about us, but it is true. And so I think that that makes it incumbent upon us to be additionally cynical of like any sort of thought process that's like, this is hard, so it inherently must be better.
Good.
You could,
Yeah.
the hardest is not going to be the most beneficial for you. Like I could go out and do Killian Jornet's training, but the outcome is not going to be the same. And, whatever mental toughness I have in that process doesn't guarantee the results that I actually care about.
And I also challenge athletes sometimes to think about where you have this idea of like less is better or more restrictive practices, but like have you tried the opposite approach, or have you like shifted that mindset to like, well, what if I do more? Like what would happen there? What if I tried to add magnesium in my diet or something like that? I've never actually done that. So like getting curious about experimenting with things rather than being like, well, it's tougher to do it this way, so it's better. That's just something else I like to add to people's like thought processes when I'm chatting with them.
I love that. Along, well, kind of going back to the specific diets, and I'll just pick out low carb, high fat, and fasted training. I don't know if you'd exactly call fasted training a diet, but it kind of falls, I would guess, like I would say like under patterns of behavior are two that we get all the time for mountain athletes. What are would you say like the perceived benefits of these diets?
As far as like the fasted training goes, is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
like yeah, like what do you see when athletes come to you and they say like, "Hey, I've been doing this." Like what are the hope for gains from
Oh, like,
from
well,
taking that on.
yeah, the biggest thing that I see is like, uh, they think that their fat oxidation rates are going to improve, and so that overall can then help them with endurance. That's like the biggest like argument for doing that. But like the alternative is like, I feel like the messaging of, oh well, if you didn't do that, actually like maybe you would prevent bone stress injuries or hormonal issues, especially with, the more research that's coming out. I mean, we need a lot more, but like for female athletes, it's like, also, are we paying attention to those sorts of differences between people? Even for my male athletes that are like injury prone, like they don't recognize that, like, oh, this fasted training could have actually like contributed to my bone stress injuries that I've been getting. But I think it's kind of to your point, like it's promoted as like, oh, this is better for you as your toughness if you don't eat beforehand, or it's going to help you lose weight if you don't eat beforehand. And even when they've done comparison studies between people that fast for exercise and those that don't fast, there's not a difference in weight loss or body comp change. So it's just, I think there's just a lot of misconception out there, but I am hopeful that the message is shifting actually in the fasting realm of things.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too. I mean, I will say that we had a time period where we did promote that back when there was thought that it it could be helpful with fat adaptations. We do not. We've gone very much the opposite direction and have really worked on, which is another reason we're kind of like really trying to hammer this point home of this is not great. So I'm appreciative of you two also, yeah, backing that effort. Um,
The great news is
yeah,
that doing aerobic base training will make you more effective at fat oxidation, and that one's for free, folks. You can still eat carbs and get more effective at burning fat.
Well, it's kind of like the statement we were making at the beginning, like, is the perceived benefit of someone doing that, is it actually going to make that big of a percentage of difference? Likely not. For the majority of people that are like asking questions about this. So that's the other thing to think about too, is like, is the risk really worth any like potential benefit that this could provide? For most people, I would say no, and it's actually going to be a lot riskier for them to not fuel with something. um and then the other thing that I see is just like, people are like, well, I can't do this because it bugs my stomach, or I don't have time. And so like, having people understand like, what is the purpose of like having fuel beforehand, and what are some alternative ways to think about this. I just think people hear something, they latch onto it, and then they're like, well, I have to do it this way, and then I also like, I don't have time to do it the other way. And so that's, I feel like, part of our goal as a podcast is to help people with that, and then my goal as a sports dietitian to help people like figure out the how as well, after we kind of like set the record straight.
yeah, no, I love that. Keep keep doing the work that we need in this world. So what are some of the risks that you see, from these diets?
No, I mean, I think one that is missed out on a lot is like the mental health side of things.
Great
So
point.
there's
Yeah.
mental and physical downsides to these diets, and for a lot of people, again, it like becomes their full identity. For many people, it becomes a form of control that they like can't break out of, and can't be. It's very rigid, so they like can't break out of that, and can lead people down like a path towards an eating disorder, or even like a more extreme, just like disordered eating. So it has like physical, social, mental health downsides, and then physically, like that increase. Oftentimes, they're with a lot of the extremes, we're missing out on something because they're like restricting and cutting something out. So, like, if we're cutting out a complete food group or like really limiting carbs or something, are we missing out on like beneficial fiber for our microbiome? What about our micronutrients? Like, all of the like when we're doing low carb, it can increase bone resorption factors, which can increase your risk for stress fractures. So there's like all of these things that can happen or are missing out, or we might be missing out on, and then for many athletes, like they might not realize it until a little ways down the road. Like, some people are like, oh, I feel great, like 1 or 2 months into this whole thing that they're doing. But then you ask them 6 months, 12 months later, and it's like, ooh, okay, maybe I didn't realize that these are some of the downsides to this, and it's too late because I got to put on stress injury or something, or my thyroid ended up like going to crap, or my gut, like I can't stop pulling over on the side of the trail because I have to go to the bathroom because my gut's not functioning. So um I would say like for some of these things it's just like you don't even see the full effects until long later down the road.
Love that. Zoe, do you want to add anything onto that or?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would emphasize is that a lot of times people choose these diets as like a way of I need a different to form an identity, to form a community, to have that sense of control. And those are all very normal human desires, but using your diet as manipulating your diet to achieve that feeling is like you're sacrificing so much of your athletic and adventure potential at the altar of like feeling a little more in control, and potentially not attending to a mental health issue that, if attended to, could lead to performance breakthroughs in a healthier relationship with food. And so like the desire to adhere to these workouts are totally based on like really valid human needs. Like we love, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but people actually love being told what to do. Like stricter religions end up being more popular and like than more relaxed ones. People are counterintuitively really driven to fairly rigid ways of thinking and being because it makes being a person so much easier. And I mean, for a lot of people, training can satisfy a little bit of that need, but for other folks, diet starts to satisfy that. And there are huge downsides to allowing that to be your primary outlet for identity formation and community building.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Like, I love that both of you have really touched on the mental piece because we're, I feel like it is becoming very apparent that bone stress injuries, that there's a lot of physical taxing, but it's the mental piece and just missing out on food is such a part of our culture. It's so sad not to be able to engage in that. But
Totally. And I think that that's one of the big thing, like we always want to push people to sort of widen the lens on how they view health. And like if you're so obsessed with eating healthy that you can't go out to eat with friends, you can't have a meal with your family or with your kids or with a significant other, if you can't, you know, get a meal at the airport without panicking and like having a big emotional reaction, I don't know that that's that healthy. And so I always want people, like Kylie said, to think about their social well being, their mental health and well being as well. And we don't just eat to make our bodies like better athletic bodies. Food serves multiple amazing purposes. And I think that's what makes all of this so tricky and complicated and juicy, is it doesn't just fuel us up mountains, but it's also what can make us like better parents and partners and people. And sometimes that we can neglect those aspects of how to fuel and how to show up more present in our lives, to the detriment of that part of our lives, because we get so focused on the athletic part, when often sort of fueling in a way that balances both sides of that thing in a way that is balanced and does take into account different aspects of health will typically lead to better performance breakthroughs anyway.
yeah, no, it's 100% true. It's nice to just be honest, like, yes, validating that. Yes, let's keep trying our best and yeah, taking those steps. So do you how do we help athletes resist these diets? I mean, you two, I feel like are in many ways at the forefront of this by starting the podcast, by being coach, writer, dietitian. But yeah, kind of like what are some of these steps that we can get people on a healthier track earlier?
listen to the podcast. No.
That's
um,
true. Easy.
yeah, yeah. No, I think in reality though, like being able the tough part is like being able to recognize when something is a fad, right? Or like an extreme. And so that's what we're trying to do with the podcast is to help people navigate that world a little bit better, especially when they're bombarded with things on social media that um might sound too good to be true. Like that is an indicator is like when extreme words are used, when I usually say when things are like completely cut out or really restrictive, that's another like indicator that maybe this might be a fad that's happening right now. Or we do encourage our audience and people to look up maybe if they're where the scientific research is behind like posts they might see, or like if a pro athlete is talking about something, like whether that's actually a valid thing. But we do recognize that that isn't what everyone's going to do, and it can be hard to navigate on your own. So again, that's kind of why one of the reasons why we are doing the podcast is to help people navigate the world with them.
And we always really try to avoid being prescriptive. We don't tell people what to do or how to think. We try to give them frameworks and sets of tools to think more critically for themselves. And to that end, I would say anyone who is potentially telling you how to think and is like trying to discourage critical thinking and who is trying to be overly prescriptive, particularly if they are just some guy on Instagram with abs and that's like the be all end all of his accreditation, be skeptical of that. And like, I know that sounds ridiculous, but the way our brains work, a lot of us are more likely to believe the guy on Instagram with abs than, the boring scientific paper that has a methodology section that's 12 pages long. And I think that just, being aware of how our human brains work, making peace with that, giving ourselves grace, and sort of understanding that anytime something seems like sticky in the way of like, oh, like that's so tempting, like I really want that to be true, and paying attention to the things you want to be true, because oftentimes those are unfortunately not the things that end up being true.
Yeah. Or have you found that the nutrition realm, we'll stick to like endurance sports for right now, is moving in hopefully like more positive direction, or are you finding there's still a lot of misinformation and just kind of traps basically out there?
I think we're always, I think the fads are always happening. Like, I think a lot of people are, again, searching for that identity or that performance advantage. And while I want to be hopeful about things, I think it's natural for people to want to look for that magic thing or like pill or diet or thing that could get them a potential benefit. And so that's why I think that's why we're equipping people with the ability to kind of be able to research this on their own or make a decision on their own, so that they hopefully can make one that's going to not lead them down a dark rabbit hole.
I think, unfortunately, human nature is probably not going to change dramatically in the near
Yeah.
future. And we're always going to be drawn to the bright, shiny object. We're always going to be drawn to what is novel and what promises us the thing we want most. And unfortunately, the thing that is changing is technology, particularly in terms of social media and the attention economy, because those modalities are really able to sort of like hijack and dial up to 11 how our brains work. And they really overemphasize what is novel and what might like lack evidence. They really like the media that are thriving most, think like Substack, podcasts, like the newsletter, social media space, like those are all N of one sample sizes. And a lot of the information people are consuming more and more is N of one. It's less like triangulated, like stuff from various sources and experts, less citation of sources, much more like I did a cold plunge and I lost 12 pounds. So should you. Buy my $300 coaching program at the link in bio. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of these technologies and the attention economy have sort of hijacked our totally normal, healthy human impulses for their own ends. And unfortunately, the attention economy and the types of media that are really thriving right now are somewhat at odds with really good scientific communication, which is slow, kind of boring, isn't very prescriptive, leaves you with a lot more questions than answers. And that's not what people crave. People crave like definite, like something that's definite. They don't crave nuance. They don't crave complicated ways of thinking things that, take you to more questions than answers. They crave the guy on Instagram with the six pack who, says that like cold plunging will cure your depression and make you lose weight and PR your marathon.
Wow, that would truly be magical. I hate cold
I
plunges though,
wish, right?
so
I want that to be true.
yeah. Yeah, can't stand them. Rather sit
Nope,
in this. I'd
nope.
rather be hot. I am curious because I mean that's actually something that we think about at uphill because in a way like mountain sports have obviously been around for a really long time, but it is such a small demographic of people. Do you think that part of the susceptibility of athletes is perhaps because a lot of it is N of one? Like I think we have a lot more information, maybe marathon down, for running, but when you start getting into perhaps like the murkier territory of big mountains, of longer ultras, we just kind of don't have as much of like, hey, this is kind of the gold
Right,
standard, and
right. Like,
yeah,
there's not a lot of studies on
there's
like
yeah,
here, like we've like A/B tested all these different ways to train for a 250-mile race, and we did a randomized controlled trial, and here's what came out as being the most beneficial. Like, there is not that much science on mountain athletes, on endurance athletes, particularly operating at the extremes. And I think you're totally spot on that a lot of times that does leave like this isn't one of those cases where it's like with a lot of nutrition information, like we kind of know what this like science does have some answers and they're unfortunately very boring and hard to sell, but we are genuinely operating at the extremes of mountain athletics and endurance sports. I think a lot of times those gaps that would typically be filled in with like more like traditional systems like science, like tried and true coaching methodologies, end up getting filled in sometimes by people that do mean really well with their sort of N of one experience. And a lot of times it gets filled in with grifters who are trying to sell you something and are taking advantage of that knowledge gap. So I think people have to be equally cognizant of both, whether someone's well intentioned or poorly intentioned. Being like the sample size is always, always, always really important to keep your eye critically trained on. And that doesn't mean you don't listen to people, but I think it just means you really have to always take that evidence with a huge grain of salt. And if you're a scientist listening, hey, we're here. Do science on us. I would love a muscle biopsy.
yeah, same. I have done some pretty uh silly things, we'll say, in my life, and I would totally have done like any, pretty much, maybe not any, but a lot of this, like if they had wanted to do science on me, like totally would have been down. um yeah, I'm also curious because I think we have a tendency to take a either the loudest person in the room or kind of the most visible and use that experience as like the N of one. um I like am grappling this because I'm a little bit tempted to say like we often use elites as kind of like this guiding force for the rest of us, but I do feel like elites tend to be very calculated. I think I'm gonna say this a little bit less in the mountaineering world, just because there's really not as much information as there is in the running world. But I'm curious how you kind of see that relationship, and like how much can someone who's kind of at the cutting edge of the sport, how much can more of the everyday athlete take from their example, from their knowledge, and apply it to their own work? Like, is that a dangerous path to go down, or like, yeah, how do you take that?
I I would definitely proceed with caution because just because someone is good at running and is an
Yes.
expert of their own body does not make them an expert of your running and your body. I mean, if so, Eliud Kipchoge would be also the greatest coach of all time, in addition to being the greatest runner. Experience is not a one to one for expertise in this way. And I think also when we look at elites, like this is a so like that might in fact be a very poor sample size to look at, because how one to one is that? Like I do not have like the lifestyle of a professional athlete where I can just train, then convalesce all day and drink my recovery smoothie while I'm attended to by, various masseurs and, whatever I imagine that professional runners do. And I think that a lot of times we have to always like filter that information through the prism of like, what additional resources does this person have? Did they also win the genetic lottery? Does this person have kids? Do they have unlimited grocery resources? Like, what other factors might explain the efficacy of whatever given intervention you're thinking of? Because just being elite, like, it's not just a like, okay, this fast person said that they drank tart cherry juice and that's what got them a marathon PR. There's a lot of variables there that you have no idea about. So I think being really skeptical and just being cognizant that that doesn't mean don't do it, but it means like be really aware that you are not a direct one to one. And that's not because of ability, it's a lot of times because of resources and genetics and a lot of other things that are outside of your control. And I actually think that sometimes knowing how many things in training aren't in our control sometimes causes people to overly fixate on these little interventions that sort of reinforce a small sense of control. Like, well, I have like two kids at home and I work every weekend and all of that feels pretty out of my control, but I can go buy this ketone supplement. And that makes me feel like I'm like putting myself back in the driver's seat of my training in this small way that I can't always do because of my specific life circumstances.
I mean, I also would add, like, I'm glad that you said, Zoe, like, yes, maybe you could like try some of these things yourself, but also, what I would ask people, like, I'm always asking people first, like, do you have the basics dialed in? And then, like, is this something like that is going to, yes, like work into your lifestyle? Is this something that could interact with your medication? Is this something that, like, everyone has different physiology and also like different potential health issues, et cetera. And so I think just like looking at a ketone supplement and being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just go take that because so and so takes it. That's not taking into account your own personal circumstances as well. But I'm not discouraging people from like not getting curious about things either. So
Yeah, and I think that the really interesting thing too, as you're growing as an athlete, learning is like what worked. I feel like that's where people get stuck a lot. Is they're like, oh, I took that ketone on a cue one time and it like made me feel great. It's like, well, actually, you probably just got a good night of sleep and like ate enough and drank enough water, but then they're stuck on like, oh yeah, now I always have to take it. It's like, there's a lot of factors.
Exactly. And it's so hard to set, like, that's one of the reasons that there isn't a ton of science here, is because getting quality data would be really hard. Like, how do you do a randomized control trial on a lot of these interventions? And I think that like should just give us all an additional prod to approach with humility and a bit of skepticism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah, anything else you two would like to touch on? Again, thank you so much. I feel like I just got to ask questions of like hoping for these wonderful answers, and I got all of it. So psyched to have both of you on. But yeah, anything else you'd like to touch on?
Mostly just that, I like also like I'm an athlete myself and I strongly identify with that desire to try to play at the margins and to try to take advantage of like anything that I can. But just like you said, more often than not, it just comes back to making sure you have the fundamentals dialed. And whenever I do find in myself when I like that I want to make a change or I want to try an intervention, I want to buy some bright new shiny object or try some new way of eating or being, I always want to ask myself, is this meeting more of an emotional need than a physical need? And what is like what am I actually trying to do with this? Is it trying to meet a need of like not feeling like I'm enough, not feeling like I'm in control? And oftentimes the answer to that question can give me an additional lens to sort of look at whatever intervention I'm thinking of through, that can be helpful and make me make a more rational decision. And on our podcast, we do a lot of science and a lot of research, and we also always try to bring in like the historical and emotional context, because I know we all like to think that we're purely rational beings and we make all of our decisions based on the best emerging science and whatever our spreadsheet tells us to do and whatever our coach and training plan and Training Peak says. But more often than not, we're actually making a lot of these decisions from a surprisingly emotional place. And I don't think that's always bad, insofar that we're aware of it and we're harnessing it and it's not harnessing us.
Love
No,
it.
I love that. That was great, Zoe. I would say, like, additionally, who, like, asking people who they're getting their advice from, because if you ask yourself that question first, and then asking yourself, like, what potential motives does this person have, like the point about Zoe saying that, like, is this like an elite athlete that has a different circumstance than you, and looking towards like more expert type people in the field versus like an Instagram influencer. So being able to discern, like, where am I getting this message from? Should I explore this further? If so, can I also explore it further from an expert's perspective if it's not coming from an expert? That would be another just like little tip.
Oh, that's great. So where can people find the podcast? Where can they get in touch with you? Yeah, would love to hear.
Wherever you're listening to this podcast, you will find
Perfect.
us. Also, unless this is on YouTube, in which case we are audio only. Thank God. But we're also on Instagram at Your Diet Sucks Pod.
Awesome. Yeah, we are trying to move in the direction of YouTube. So we'll see. It
Someday,
scares me. Yeah, we'll get there one day. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for being on, and thank you for listening to the Uphill Athlete podcast. It's not just one, but a community. We are Uphill Athlete.